Hey everyone, welcome back to our English learning podcast, where we turn tricky grammar into simple, everyday conversation. I'm Adam, your co-host, and today, we've got something really exciting lined up for you. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to talk about what if or what could have happened, but didn't know how to say it in English? Well, you're in the right place.
Hi, I'm Sophia, and trust me, mastering this topic will make you sound more fluent and confident in no time. Today we're talking about conditional sentences, those if sentences you hear all the time in movies, songs, and daily life. Why are they so important? Because they let you express possibilities, hypotheticals, and even regrets. And once you learn them, you'll notice your conversations becoming a lot more dynamic.
Exactly. Imagine being able to confidently say things like, if I study hard, I'll pass the test. Or, if I were rich, I'd travel the world. How cool is that? By the end of this episode, you'll know how to use all types of conditionals, from zero to mixed, with confidence and ease.
That's right. So grab your notebook, stay tuned, and let's jump into mastering conditional sentences in English. Trust us, this is going to be fun, engaging, and packed with tips you can use right away.
Okay, before we dive into the different types of conditional sentences, let's start with the basics. What exactly are conditional sentences? Well, they're a special kind of sentence in English that talk about situations and their possible results. Think of them as the what-if sentences. For example, if it rains, I'll stay home. The sentence has two parts, the if clause, which talks about the condition, in this case rain, and the main clause, which tells us what will happen if that condition is met, in this case, staying home. Simple, right? But the beauty of conditional sentences is that they allow you to talk about possibilities, hypothetical scenarios, and even things you regret. And don't worry, we're going to break this all down step by step.
Exactly. And the cool thing is, you already use conditionals in your native language all the time. You just don't realize it. In English, there are four main types of conditionals: zero, first, second, and third. Each one has its own unique structure and purpose. For example, the zero conditional is for facts like, if you heat water, it boils. The first conditional is for real, possible situations in the future like, if you study, you'll pass. Then there's the second conditional, which is for imaginary situations like, if I were rich, I'd travel the world. And finally, the third conditional, which is for talking about regrets like, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the test. You see how powerful this is?
That's right. Conditionals give your conversations depth and help you express yourself better. They're used in everyday life, in movies, songs, and even in jokes. For example, have you ever heard someone say, if I had $1 for every time? That's a conditional. So, whether you're just learning English or want to take your skills to the next level, mastering these sentences will make a huge difference. And remember, conditionals always come in two parts. The condition, what needs to happen, and the result, what happens if the condition is met. It's like a cause and effect relationship. Ready to dive into each type?
Absolutely. And as we go through each type, we'll give you plenty of examples and tips to make it easier to understand and use. So, don't worry if it feels overwhelming at first. By the end of this podcast, you'll have a clear understanding of all the conditionals and how to use them confidently.
All right, let's dive into the zero conditional, the simplest and most straightforward of all the conditionals. But don't let its simplicity fool you. This one is incredibly useful in everyday life. So what exactly is the zero conditional? It's used to talk about general truths, facts, or things that always happen under specific conditions. For example, if you heat water, it boils. Now notice two things about this sentence. First, the condition is, if you heat water, and second, the result is, it boils. What's cool about the zero conditional is that both parts of the sentence are in the present tense. Why? Because it describes something that is always true. It's a fact of life, not a one-time situation. Sophia, Doesn't it feel like this conditional is everywhere once you notice it?
Absolutely, Adam. The zero conditional is all around us, especially when we're talking about science, rules, or instructions. Think about this. If you touch fire, you get burned. It's not about one specific instance, it's a universal truth. The structure is super simple. You use the present tense in both the if clause and the main clause. For example, if it rains, the ground gets wet, or if you don't water plants, they die. These are things that always happen. Here's a fun tip. You can often replace the word if with when without changing the meaning. For example, when you heat water, it boils. See how interchangeable they are? That's because we're talking about facts that don't change.
Exactly. And what I love about the zero conditional is how practical it is. Imagine you're giving someone instructions or explaining how something works. This is the conditional you'll use. For example, if you press this button, the light turns on. Or, if you mix blue and yellow, you get green. It's like the language of cause and effect. And here's a fun way to practice. Think about habits or routines in your life. For instance, if I drink coffee in the evening, I stay awake. Or, if I exercise in the morning, I feel energized all day. Start observing how you can apply it to your daily life. It's such a handy tool for clear communication.
And here's another thing. You'll hear the zero conditional a lot in recipes and instructions. For example, if you bake the cake for too long, it burns. Or, if you don't stir the sauce, it sticks to the pan. It's the go-to conditional for describing steps and results. Once you master this, you'll notice it everywhere, on TV, in conversations, even in advertisements. And if you want to take your practice to the next level, write down 5 general truths you know and turn them into zero conditional sentences. For instance, if the sun sets, it gets dark. Or, if you skip meals, you get hungry. Write them down and say them out loud. It'll help you build confidence.
That's such a great idea, Sophia. And speaking of confidence, here's a little exercise to challenge our listeners. Think about 3 things you know are always true. Maybe something related to science, your daily routine, or even fun facts. Then, turn them into zero conditional sentences. For example, if you leave ice in the sun, it melts. Or, if you don't get enough sleep, you feel tired. The key is to keep both parts of the sentence in the present tense. And here's a pro tip. The more examples you practice, the easier it'll become to use conditionals naturally in your conversations.
Exactly, Adam. And don't forget, the zero conditional is the foundation of all the other conditionals. Once you understand this structure, you'll find it so much easier to grasp the first, second, and third conditionals. So, if you're listening right now, take a moment to think about your examples and practice them out loud. And if you have any questions or examples you're unsure about, feel free to share them in the comments. We'd love to help you get them just right.
Perfect advice, Sophia. So, listeners, remember, the zero conditional is simple, logical, and incredibly useful. Start practicing it in your daily conversations, and I promise you'll see a huge improvement in how confidently you can express yourself. All right, now that we've covered the zero conditional, let's move on to the first conditional, the one that's all about real and possible situations in the future. Ready, Sophia?
Let's do it! But before we go, don't forget to practice what we've covered so far. Conditionals might seem tricky at first, but with time and repetition, you'll master them. On to the first conditional.
All right, now that we've mastered the zero conditional, it's time to move on to the first conditional. This one is all about real and possible situations in the future. So here's the question. How do we use the first conditional in daily conversations? Well, it's simple. This conditional helps you talk about what will happen if a certain condition is met. For example, if you study hard, you will pass the exam. In this sentence, the condition is, if you study hard, and the result is, you will pass the exam. Notice how the if clause is in the present tense, but the main clause uses will. This structure makes it clear that we're talking about a future possibility.
Exactly, Adam. The first conditional is super practical because it lets you express real scenarios, like plans, warnings, and even advice. Let's take an everyday example. If it rains tomorrow, I'll bring an umbrella. You're talking about something that could realistically happen in the future, and you're preparing for the possible result. Another example could be, if you call her, she will help you. It's a great way to show cause and effect, especially when making decisions or giving advice. And here's something interesting. You can also replace will with other modal verbs like can, may, or might, depending on the situation. For example, if you work hard, you might get a promotion. It's still a first conditional, but it adds a layer of uncertainty or possibility.
That's a great point, Sophia. And what makes the first conditional so exciting is how versatile it is. You can use it in so many different contexts. For example, think about offering warnings. If you don't wear a jacket, you'll catch a cold. Or even making promises. If you come to my party, I'll bake your favorite cake. And let's not forget how useful it is for setting goals. If I save enough money, I will travel to Europe next year. You see? Once you get the hang of this, you'll start using it naturally in your conversations.
Absolutely, Adam. And here's a fun way to practice. Try turning some of your own plans or decisions into first conditional sentences. For example, if I wake up early tomorrow, I'll go for a run. Or, if I finish my work on time, I'll watch a movie. Think about your daily life and create sentences that reflect real situations. It's such a powerful way to internalize this structure. Oh, and another tip. Listen to songs or watch movies where the first conditional is used. For example, in the song If You Leave Me Now by Chicago, they sing about what will happen if someone leaves. It's everywhere in pop culture.
Great tip, Sophia. And while we're on the topic of practicing, let's play a quick game with our listeners. I'll start a first conditional sentence, and you complete it. For example, I'll say, if I don't get enough sleep tonight, and you could say, I'll feel tired tomorrow. Easy, right? Let's try a few more. If I learn conditionals, and if it's sunny this weekend. Listeners, pause the podcast for a moment and try completing these sentences yourself. It's a great way to build confidence.
I love that idea, Adam. And remember, the key is to focus on real possibilities. The first conditional is like a tool for talking about your future and what could happen based on your actions. And don't forget, you can mix it up with other modal verbs like we mentioned earlier. For example, if you join the meeting, you might learn something new. Or, if you don't practice conditionals, you may struggle with advanced English. There's so much flexibility with this structure, and it really makes your speech sound more natural and fluent.
Exactly, Sophia. And one last tip before we move on. Pay attention to how native speakers use the first conditional. You'll notice it in conversations, on TV shows, and even in casual advice like, if you don't try, you'll never know. The more you listen, the more it will start to feel natural to you. All right, now that we've got a solid understanding of the first conditional, let's move on to one of my personal favorites, the second conditional. This one's all about dreaming big and imagining possibilities. Ready, Sophia?
I'm ready. And listeners, don't forget to practice creating your own first conditional sentences. Share them with us in the comments or with your friends. It's the best way to learn. On to the second conditional.
All right, now it's time for the second conditional, and I have to say, it's one of the most fun conditionals to use. Why? Because the second conditional is all about imagining possibilities, dreams, and things that are unlikely or even impossible. It's the what-if conditional. For example, if I were a millionaire, I would travel the world. Notice something here. This isn't talking about a real, present situation. It's about something hypothetical, something that could be true in a dream or an imagined scenario. The condition is, if I were a millionaire, and the result is, I would travel the world. The key here is that we're talking about an unlikely or unreal situation, and that's the essence of the second conditional.
Exactly, Adam. The second conditional is all about imagining an alternate reality, and it's often used to talk about things that are not true now, but that we wish were true. For example, if I had a superpower, I would fly. Or if I knew the answer, I would tell you. Notice how the structure is different from the first conditional. Instead of using the present tense in the if clause and will in the main clause, we use the past tense in the if clause, like were or had, and would, or sometimes could or might, in the main clause. So it's a little more creative and a little more speculative.
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Even though we use the past tense in the if clause, the second conditional is about the present or future. It's not talking about a past situation, but a present or future hypothetical scenario. For example, if I were taller, I would play basketball. This is an imagined, unreal situation. In fact, many native speakers use were instead of was even for singular subjects, like I were instead of I was. So it's not about reality, it's about imagination. It's about saying things like, if I could meet anyone in the world, I would choose. Pretty powerful, huh?
Absolutely. And here's another cool part about the second conditional. It's perfect for giving advice. For example, if I were you, I would study harder for the test. Or, if I were in your situation, I would talk to my boss about it. It's a polite and thoughtful way to suggest what someone could do if things were different. And this is where the second conditional really shines. It helps you discuss unreal or unlikely possibilities in a way that feels natural and conversational. You'll often hear it in hypothetical situations like, if I were a bird, I would sing all day. So it's a very creative and flexible tool.
Right. And another fun way to use the second conditional is to talk about regrets, or things you would do differently if the situation were different. For example, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the exam. Notice how this sounds a bit like a hypothetical reflection? It's not really about the present. It's more about imagining how things could have been if circumstances were different. So, in a way, the second conditional allows us to reflect on our lives and imagine a world where things have turned out differently.
Great point, Adam. The second conditional really lets you express those what-if scenarios that we all think about. And here's an interesting tip. You can also use the second conditional in conversations to express wishes. For example, I wish I were on vacation right now. Or, I wish I could speak 5 languages. So, the second conditional is not only for dreams about the future, but also for reflecting on what you'd do if life were different, whether it's about travel, work, or even relationships.
Exactly. The second conditional is a great way to explore your dreams and ideas about things that are possible but not likely. So, listeners, let's do a little exercise. Think about 3 things you would do if your life were different. For example, if I were a famous musician, I would perform around the world. Or, if I lived near the beach, I would go swimming every day. It's really fun to think of these scenarios and say them out loud. And remember, using were instead of was is totally correct, especially when talking about hypothetical situations like, if I were a chef, I would cook amazing meals.
Exactly. And let's make it even more interesting. Try combining some of these with advice or wishes. For example, if I were you, I would take that job offer. Or, if I could do anything, I would start my own business. By doing this, you're not just practicing the structure, but also learning how to use it in real, meaningful conversations.
Such a great idea, Sophia. And before we move on, remember that the second conditional is all about imagination, dreams, and hypothetical scenarios. It helps you think about possibilities that aren't true now, but could be in a different world, a different reality. So don't be afraid to get creative with your sentences, whether you're giving advice, expressing regrets, or just dreaming about what could be.
Exactly. Now that we've explored the second conditional, I'm sure you can already think of a few ways to use it in your own life. All right, let's take things one step further. In the next chapter, we're going to get into the third conditional, the one that's all about talking about regrets and things you would have done differently. Ready, Adam?
Let's go! I'm excited for this one. It's a great way to reflect on past events and turn them into powerful learning experiences. On to the third conditional. All right, we've made it to the final conditional in our series, the third conditional. And let me tell you, this one is all about looking back at the past and imagining how things could have turned out differently. If you've ever said, "I wish I had done that differently," or "if only I had known," you've probably used the third conditional without even realizing it. This conditional is used to talk about things that didn't happen in the past and to imagine how the result would have been different if things had been different. For example, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the test. This talks about something in the past that didn't happen and the result of what might have been.
Exactly, Adam. The third conditional is all about regret, reflection, and imagining how things could have turned out if you had made a different choice. The structure is a little different from the others, though. You use the past perfect in the if clause, like if I had known, and would have in the main clause, like I would have gone. So, the structure is if plus past perfect, plus would have plus past participle. It sounds a bit tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's super useful for expressing regret and learning from past experiences.
Right, Sophia. And the beauty of the third conditional is that it gives you a chance to reflect on your past decisions. It's like saying, "I can't change what happened, but if I could, here's what I would have done differently." For example, if I had woken up earlier, I wouldn't have missed the bus. Or, if they had invited me to the party, I would have gone. These are things that didn't happen in the past, but we imagine the possible results if they had. The third conditional helps us process those situations, learn from them, and sometimes even feel a little bit better about them.
And let's not forget how useful this can be in giving advice about the past. For example, if you had studied harder, you would have passed the exam. Or, if I had known you were sick, I would have helped you. It's a great way to reflect on past mistakes and figure out what could have been done differently. But here's the tricky part. While we can use the third conditional to express regret or imagine a different reality, we can never change the past. That's the beauty of it. It's a way to learn without being stuck in what we can't control.
Exactly, Sophia. The third conditional is like a time machine for your thoughts. It lets you go back and think, "What if?" without actually being able to change things. It's also often used in stories and movies when characters reflect on their actions and wish they had done something differently. So, you'll hear it a lot in the past tense, like in movies, "If I had known the truth, I would have acted differently." It's that moment of realization when you think, "If only I had done this, the outcome would have been better." But it's not all negative. Sometimes, it's about imagining the positive outcomes that never happened.
That's such a great point, Adam. And you can even use the third conditional to talk about opportunities that you missed. For example, if I had taken that job offer, I would have moved to Paris. Or, if I had asked her out, maybe she would have said yes. We've all been in those situations where we wonder what could have happened if we'd done things differently. The third conditional helps us understand those feelings and use them as learning experiences.
Absolutely. So, let's give our listeners some practical examples to really make the third conditional stick. Think about your own life and reflect on something that didn't go the way you wanted. For example, if I had known about this podcast earlier, I would have started learning English sooner. Or, if I hadn't forgotten my keys, I wouldn't have had to wait outside. These are things that didn't happen, but we can use the third conditional to talk about how things could have been better if the situation had been different.
That's right. Now, I want you to try this out. Think of 3 situations in your life where you wish things had turned out differently. For example, if I had studied more, I would have gotten a better grade. Or, if I had taken that vacation, I would have felt more relaxed. After that, try saying them out loud to get comfortable with the structure. The more you practice, the easier it will be to use the third conditional in your own conversations.
Great exercise, Sophia. And here's a pro tip for our listeners. While the third conditional is all about the past, you can also use it for hypothetical past advice. For example, if a friend is going through something and you want to reflect on a similar situation you had, you can say, "If I had known what I know now, I would have handled things differently." It's a way to share your wisdom and experiences, and it makes your advice sound more thoughtful and empathetic.
Exactly, Adam. The third conditional is a powerful way to reflect, advise, and learn from the past. But remember, it's all about possibility, not reality. It's about imagining how the past could have been different, not changing it. So, as you go through your day, try using the third conditional to reflect on things in a positive way. It'll help you improve your language skills while also gaining new insights into your own life.
Okay, listeners, we're entering some exciting territory now. In this chapter, we're talking about mixed conditionals. This is where things get a little more advanced, but don't worry, we'll break it down step by step. Mixed conditionals are, as the name suggests, a combination of two different types of conditionals. They mix the second conditional, which talks about unreal or hypothetical situations in the present or future, with the third conditional, which reflects on past situations and regrets. So let's look at an example. If I had studied harder, I would be a doctor now. This sentence combines the past, third conditional, with the present, second conditional. In the if clause, we have the past perfect. If I had studied harder, and in the main clause, we have the result in the present. I would be a doctor now.
Exactly. Mixed conditionals are great for talking about how past actions affect our present or future. It's a combination of reflecting on what didn't happen in the past and showing how it impacts what's happening now or what could happen later. So, in the example Adam just gave, you're imagining that if you had made different choices in the past, your present situation would be different. It's not about wishing you could go back and change things, but rather understanding how the past shapes your present life. Another example could be, if I had known you were coming, I would be prepared now. This shows how the past, not knowing you were coming, affects the present, I'm not prepared.
Great example, Sophia. And what's important about mixed conditionals is that they help you express situations where both the past and the present are connected. Another common example is, if I hadn't missed the flight, I would be on vacation right now. The condition in the past, missing the flight, is affecting the present, not being on vacation. It's a powerful way to show that past decisions or actions have consequences that reach into the present moment.
Exactly. Now let's look at another type of mixed conditional that goes the other way, combining the second and third conditionals to talk about unreal present situations with a past condition. For example, if I were more confident, I would have spoken at the meeting yesterday. Here, we're imagining that if the present condition were different, being more confident, the past result would also have been different, speaking at the meeting. So, this mixes the present unreal situation with a past outcome, and it helps express regret or missed opportunities. You can see how these sentences are very specific and have layers of meaning.
Exactly. And that's what makes mixed conditionals so interesting. They allow us to express complex ideas and connect the dots between different time frames. It's a little more advanced, but once you get the hang of it, it will make your English sound much more natural and nuanced. And don't be afraid to experiment. You can mix the second and third conditionals in different ways to suit whatever situation you're describing. For instance, if I had taken that job offer, I would be living in London right now. It's another way to talk about how past decisions impact your present life and vice versa.
Exactly, Adam. And remember, mixed conditionals are a fantastic way to give a deeper, more sophisticated perspective on your experiences. It helps you show not just what happened, but also how it affects your life now. Think of it as a way to look at your life from different angles. And just like with the other conditionals, practice makes perfect. So, let's get our listeners involved with a quick exercise. Try creating a sentence where the past affects the present, like, if I hadn't missed my alarm, I would be on time for work now. And then, try one where the present affects the past, like, if I were more organized, I would have finished my project on time yesterday.
Great challenge, Sophia. Let's give our listeners a few moments to pause and think of their own sentences. The more you practice, the easier it will be to use mixed conditionals in real conversations. And don't worry if you don't get it perfect right away. What matters is that you understand the structure and the idea behind it. Plus, mixing the past with the present can help you sound much more natural when discussing complex situations.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to use these sentences when talking to others. They really help you express how the past influences the present, and they add a layer of depth to your communication. Mixed conditionals are used all the time in everyday conversations, storytelling, and even when giving advice. So, don't hesitate to throw in a mixed conditional when you're reflecting on past experiences or discussing your goals for the future.
That's right, Sophia. Mixed conditionals are a fantastic way to deepen your understanding of how the past, present, and future all connect. And as we wrap up this chapter, I want to encourage you to listen for mixed conditionals in movies, songs, and conversations. You'll be surprised how often they come up when people are discussing regrets or dreams about what could have been. All right, listeners. We've covered a lot about conditionals already. Everything from the zero conditional to mixed conditionals. But now, we need to address something really important. The common mistakes people make when using conditionals. Trust me, no one's perfect, and even native speakers can get them wrong sometimes. So in this chapter, we're going to go over some of the most frequent mistakes, and more importantly, how to avoid them. Let's dive in, Sophia.
Definitely, Adam. One of the biggest mistakes that learners make is confusing the verb tenses in the if clause and the main clause. For example, many English learners might say, if I will go to the store, I will buy some milk. This is incorrect. The rule is simple. You don't use will in the if clause in the first conditional. Instead, you use the present simple tense. So, the correct sentence is, if I go to the store, I will buy some milk. Remember, if clauses are never followed by will. That's a common mistake we see a lot.
Exactly, Sophia. That's a classic one. It can be tempting to throw in a will to make it sound more certain, but it's just not grammatically correct in the if clause. Another common mistake has to do with the second conditional. Learners often say, if I was a millionaire, I would travel the world. Now, this might sound okay in casual speech, but the correct form is actually, if I were a millionaire, I would travel the world. This is called the subjunctive mood, and even though it's not commonly used in everyday speech, it's important to follow this rule when you're speaking more formally or in writing.
Right. And here's another tricky area: confusing the second and third conditionals. The second conditional is about hypothetical situations in the present or future, while the third conditional is about imagining how the past could have been different. So, learners might mix them up, like saying, if I had a car, I would have driven to the beach yesterday. This is a mistake. The sentence is mixing a present hypothetical situation with a past event. The correct version would be, if I had had a car, I would have driven to the beach yesterday. The key is making sure that the tenses match up correctly for the situation you're describing.
Great point, Sophia. Another mistake I've heard a lot is using the wrong conditional for advice or regrets. For instance, someone might say, if I were you, I would have done it differently. While this might sound natural, it's actually incorrect because you're talking about a present situation, something you would do now, not something in the past. The correct sentence would be, if I were you, I would do it differently. So, remember, when you're offering advice, the second conditional is usually the correct choice, even if you're talking about the present.
Exactly. And here's another mistake that often happens with mixed conditionals. Some learners forget to match the timeframes correctly between the if clause and the main clause. For example, a sentence like, if I had studied harder, I would be passing the exam, now is wrong. The result of the past condition should not affect the present situation in this way. The correct sentence would be, if I had studied harder, I would have passed the exam. This keeps the past condition consistent with the past result.
Yes, exactly. And it's not just about the structure. Sometimes learners get confused about the meaning of the conditionals. For example, they might say, if I would go to the party, I would see my friends. This is a mistake. Because the if clause shouldn't have would, we use the present simple tense there. The correct version is, if I go to the party, I will see my friends. So, understanding the meaning behind the conditionals is just as important as getting the structure right.
That's a big one. It's all about the logic of the situation. You need to think about whether you're talking about something real or hypothetical, something in the present or past, and then choose the correct structure. If you're talking about a real situation in the future, you use the first conditional. If you're imagining something that's unlikely or impossible, you use the second conditional. And if you're reflecting on a past event and wondering how it could have turned out differently, you use the third conditional.
Great summary, Sophia. One more mistake that people often make is using the wrong verb tense in the mixed conditional. For example, someone might say, if I had gone to the party, I would be having fun now. This is wrong because you're mixing the past with the present in a way that doesn't make sense. The correct sentence should be, if I had gone to the party, I would be having fun now. Notice how the past action, had gone, leads to a present hypothetical result. Would be having fun.
Exactly, Adam. And don't worry, mistakes are part of the learning process. The important thing is to recognize these errors, understand why they happen, and correct them. So, let's challenge our listeners with a quick exercise. Try identifying the mistakes in the following sentences and correct them. 1. If I will see her tomorrow, I will talk to her. 2. If I was rich, I would have bought a mansion. 3. If I had gone to bed earlier, I would be waking up fresh. Take a moment to fix these, and then you'll see just how much progress you've made.
Great exercise, Sophia. Don't forget to pay close attention to the tenses in both the if clause and the main clause. Practice is key. The more you use conditionals correctly, the easier it will get.
Exactly. So, listeners, make sure to be mindful of these common mistakes as you practice your conditionals. And remember, even native speakers make errors sometimes. The important thing is to keep learning, practicing, and improving.
That's it for today, folks. We hope you're feeling confident with conditionals now. Remember, practice makes perfect.
Exactly. Keep using what you've learned, and soon it'll feel natural. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Keep improving your English every day. Thank you.